What is a hypothesis? By Francis T.S.U., narrated by Connie Etheridge. One of Schrödinger's fake hypotheses. What is a hypothesis? The purpose of science is to search for the truth, yet the truth is depending on a physically realizable hypothesis. Firstly, it needs a theoretically proven before an experimental test. Since time, for example, temporal t greater than 0, is the law of the universe, for example, time-space, any hypothesis is required to be temporal, time greater than 0, for example, changes with time. Otherwise, its solution is not a realizable principle. Nevertheless, all analytical physics were developed from an empty space, for example, time-independent platform. This is the reason why our fundamental physics is not realizable and even fake. Two pillars of our modern physics must be Einstein's relativistic space-time, and the other is Schrödinger's quantum world. Unfortunately, both were developed on an empty space where time does not exist. Since temporal, time greater than 0, is the law of time, it is time changes the space, but not space changes time. This is precisely why Einstein's relativistic and Schrödinger's quantum world are so wrong, because they violated the law of time. Nevertheless, every analytical physics needs to be proven mathematically as from theoretical standpoint. Yet they can be also proven from a hypothesis. For temporal, time greater than 0, as depicted in figure 1b, where F equal ma is restricted by law of time, then it is a physically realizable paradigm, for example, figure 1a. However, if a hypothesis is situated within an empty space, it is not a physically realizable paradigm since it has no time. This is the reason why any hypothesis must be created within a temporal t greater than 0 space. Yet all our fundamental physics were developed on a space without time, for example, time-independent space. This was the reason why all our mathematical physics are not physically realizable. Figure 1a shows a hypothesis is submerging within a space which has no time, and figure 1b shows a space has time, respectively, in which we see that a clock ticks at a constant pace that cannot be changed or stopped. All hypotheses were planned. Believe me or not, all our hypothetical sciences were planned. They were mathematical gimmicks that served the objectives of the postulators. For example, hypotheses of Einstein and Schrödinger quantum theory were two major conspirators that caused our theoretical physics a great harm and damages. For instance, time dilation equation of Einstein, as given by the following equation, was created in a no-time space paradigm, for example, shown in figure 2a, in which it violates the law of time, for example, temporal t is greater than 0. Nevertheless, if one submerges Einstein's hypothesis in a temporal t greater than 0 space paradigm, for example, figure 2b, in which I have inserted with a universal clock, from which one can easily figure out why his time dilation equation is false, from which we see that all hypotheses so far were designed to favor the proposer's objective. This is precisely why our modern physics is so wrong. Footnote 1, FTSU, Introduction to Physically Realizable Physics. Figure 2a shows Einstein's hypothesis is submerged in an empty space platform. Figure 2b shows his hypothesis is submerged in a temporal t greater than 0 space paradigm. Hamiltonian hypothesis. Quantum physics is the legacy of Hamiltonian mechanics, where Hamiltonian's hypothesis is depicted in Figure 3a, from which we see that his hypothesis was intentionally designed to favor his prediction. One apparent mistake of his hypothesis must be his paradigm is not a physically realizable hypothesis, since substance cannot coexist within an empty space. But Sir Hamilton pushed on to favor his prediction mathematically. Nevertheless, it must be Schrödinger's clever mathematical gimmicks that changed Hamiltonian to quantum mechanics, which is based on Schrödinger's own interest that is intentionally introduced an eigenwave function of phi in favor to his personal objective at the expense of physically realizability, for which Hamiltonian and Schrödinger's hypotheses alike have violated the law of time. For example, temporal t greater than 0, as depicted in Figure 3b. Figure 3a shows a Hamiltonian hypothesis situated within an empty space paradigm. 3b shows a Hamiltonian hypothesis is situated within a temporal t greater than 0 space platform. A universal clock is also inserted, showing that time is continually running at the same pace. Hypothesis of Einstein. Modern physics was started from before Einstein's era over a century ago. For simplicity, I begin with relativistic hypothesis, of which Einstein was intentionally crafted to favor his objective. Since he had purposely hypothesized each light beam bounced back requires a tick of a clock, as reproduced from a classic textbook material shown in Figure 3a. From this, he has misguided us to believe that the clock ticks slower in motion. Nevertheless, as we submerge his hypothesis in a temporal t greater than 0 space paradigm, for example, space has time, quickly we found that his hypothesis did not add up with the result he wanted, as shown in Figure B. Nevertheless, this is just one of many evidences showing that every hypothesis was created to favor the postulator's intent, which is by no means unintentional or innocent. Figure 1 shows a hypothesis is submerged within a space that has no time, shown in Figure 1a, and a space has time, shown in Figure 1b, respectively. Hypothesis of Schrödinger's cat. One of Schrödinger's hypotheses must be his half-life cat, as shown in Figure 4a, in which he purposely hypothesized that only two possibilities to kill his cat, although there are other possibilities that his cat will be killed. Nevertheless, if his hypothesis is situated within a temporal t greater than 0 space, it can be shown that his cat is alive or dead before he opened the box as depicted in Figure 4b, from which it is Schrödinger's intent to hypothesize a superposition principle in favor of his objective. This is precisely the reason why nobody really understands his quantum physics, since he has constrained by only two possible conditions, which to the favor of his hypothesis. For example, as Richard Feynman had said, as I quote, "I think I can safely say that nobody understands quantum mechanics." Yet, he was the one who promoted his QED hypothesis that he did not even believe. Nevertheless, there are several possible causes that his cat would be dead or not be dead, which has nothing to do with his restricted scenarios, which he has designed in favor of his hypothesis. Figure 4a shows Schrödinger's hypothesis is submerged within a space that has no time. 4b shows a space has time, for which that his cat only is dead or alive before he opens his box. Hypothesis of Dirac. Since Dirac's hypothesis is strictly a mathematical gimmick, not even a science that should be considered in the first place, his hypothesis is primarily based on his complicated mathematics maneuvering to achieve his goal. Strictly speaking, his work did not contribute any significance to science, since his paradigm is not a physically realizable hypothesis, as can be seen in Figure 5a, in which we see that his hypothesis violates firstly the law of time, for example, temporal t is greater than 0. Since Dirac's hypothesis was postulated in favor of his objective at expense of the truth of science, or even fake. For example, how can a 14 billion light years ago substance be existed currently, since every physical reality can only exist at the current moment of time? Time equals 0. For example, you are the current moment of physical reality, but not 50 years ago of yourself. This is because every physical reality is gone with time, which cannot be repeated. Figure 5a shows a Dirac hypothesis, which is situated within an empty space paradigm, in which how can he justify mu minus can exist within our temporal t greater than 0 space, as depicted in Figure 5b. Hypothesis of Feynman's QED. Similarly, Feynman's hypothesis, as depicted in Figure 6, in which we see that his hypothesis fails to exist within our temporal t greater than 0 space, by which how can he justify that the arrow of time t, a direction of time, since time moves his hypothesis to the next moment of time, Furthermore, his position E plus violated law of time, for example, temporal t greater than 0, within our temporal t greater than 0 space. To favor his own hypothesis, he has mathematically produced a fantasy hypothesis in favor of his QED postulation, but he had neglected the physically realizable issue, of which we see that his hypothesis is strictly a mathematical gimmick. As I remembered once, he has said, "I think I can safely say that nobody understands quantum mechanics." Yet, he was a faithful follower. Nevertheless, this is not just once, but too many cases. A great scientist is willing to cover up the truth to favor his own hypothesis. Figure 6 shows the legendary Feynman diagram to favor his QED hypothesis, but it is not a physically realizable hypothesis, since firstly, it violates the law of time. Temporal t is greater than 0. Essence of time. So what is time? It is time that changes to the next moment of space, but not the space changes the moment of time. As depicted in Figure 7, it shows that it is time changes the dynamic of our universe, but not our universe, the space, changes the time, from which, without the existence of time within the space, it is impossible for our universe to change to the next moment of our universe. This is precisely why time, temporal t greater than 0, is the law of our universe, time-space. And this is the law of time we have discovered from thousands of years' observation and experiences that cannot be simply replaced by any other means, or even mathematically created by Einstein. By which we see that Einstein's 4D space-time continuum violates the law of time. For example, if one submerges his 4D space-time within a temporal t greater than 0 space, one can easily figure out that his space-time is not a physically realizable paradigm. This is exactly why his 4D space-time hypothesis was intentionally created to favor his objective, which is by no means unintentional. Figure 7 shows a composite temporal universe. It is an energy-conserved dynamic subspace. Its size is limited by the speed of light, in which we see that it is the law of time, temporal t greater than 0, that changes our universe, space, but not our universe changes the time. Note that the inserted clock is to symbolize the pace of time is the same everywhere within and outside our universe, where our universe is embedded. Einstein's 4D space-time hypothesis. It is an example to show that how a mathematically oriented physicist can misguide us, that a hypothesis in favor of his objective, as depicted in Figure 8, in which we see that it is space changes time in favor to Einstein's speculation. Added experimentally, has been claimed that 2 atomic clocks have been used as equipped independently within a set of traveling spacecrafts, by which it has proven that time slowed down in motion as predicted by Einstein. Nevertheless, If one inserted a universal clock, as shown in figure 8b, we see that Einstein's spacetime continuum is not a physically realizable spacetime that should be used in our discussion. It is simply that his spacetime cannot be existed within our temporal time greater than zero universe, of which we see that no matter how hard he tries, his hypothesis does not perform in favor of his objective, because it is time that cannot be changed. Figure 8a shows Einstein's spacetime hypothesis was created within an empty space paradigm, which has no time. 8b shows his spacetime hypothesis is submerged within a space that has time, in which we see that it is not physically hypothesis can be discussed. Physically realizable hypotheses. Since temporal t greater than zero is the law of time, every physically realizable hypothesis must obey. Nevertheless, every physically realizable event cannot be exploited for application, since it has gone with time, for which we see that paradoxes cannot be existing in science. For example, a set of identical twins cannot be the same person within our time-space, since our universe can have one and only one physical consequence, in which any hypothesis is not a temporal t greater than zero hypothesis. It cannot be a physically realizable hypothesis. For example, Schrödinger's half-life cat hypothesis, as depicted in figure 9a, in which we see that it is not a temporal time greater than zero hypothesis. That must not be a realizable hypothesis. Since every physically reality occurs only once at current moment of time, t equals zero, this is a necessary condition that every physically realizable principle must obey. Yet all our modern physicists have violated this condition. As legendary Richard Feynman has once said, "I think I can safely say that nobody understands quantum mechanics." But instead of finding out why, he went on to accept quantum mechanics in his QED. Figure 9a shows Schrödinger cat's hypothesis is situated within a space that has no time, which is the reason why one cannot tell if the cat is dead or alive, in which we see that Schrödinger will never get old. Figure 9b shows that Schrödinger will get old and eventually the cat will die, but not due to toxication as he has hypothesized. A diagrammatic hypothesis. Since a simple diagrammatic proof is worth more than a ton of analysis. For example, let me take Einstein's relativistic hypothesis as the example, by which he has shown that clock slows down in motion, as depicted in figure 10a. Nevertheless, figure 10b shows an ideal clock is traveling at speed of light from San Diego, California to San Francisco, California, in which we see that the moving clock does not slow down a bit, since it needs an amount of time, see the equation, to reach San Francisco. This was precisely what Einstein did. He had intentionally created a hypothesis in favor of his objective, by assuming that clock stops when travels at speed of light. And this is what we have learned from the textbooks. For over a century, many of us are still believing Einstein's relativist mechanics is correct. Figure 10a shows a clock travels at speed of light from San Diego to San Francisco within a space that has no time. Figure 10b shows that a clock travels at speed of light, but within a space that has time. Use hypothesis. U hypothesizes a boiled egg is either soft or hard until someone cracks it open, for which he intentionally imposed only two possible scenarios, either soft or hard, in favor of his objective. In view, the boiled egg is situated within an empty space as depicted in figure 11a. The egg will always be freshly boiled, as in favor of U's hypothesis, but no one is sure if it's hard or soft boiled. Nevertheless, he has forgotten to crack the boiled egg, but it is assumed situated within a temporal time greater than 0 space scenario shown in figure 11b. Although no one can be sure that the boiled egg is hard or soft, as situated within a space has time, t greater than 0, it is anticipated that the boiled egg will change with time. For example, if the boiled egg is cracked open after months, I'm sure it would be a rotten egg, in which we see that it is time of the egg, for example space, that changes the egg, but not the egg changes time, from which we see that U's half-boiled egg is like Schrödinger's half-life cat, since U has intentionally created a scenario to favor his objective. Figure 11a shows a freshly boiled egg is situated within a space that has no time. Figure 11b shows a freshly boiled egg is situated within a temporal time greater than 0 space, which has time. Conclusion. Since our mathematical physics was created on a virtual empty space paradigm, strictly speaking, all our hypotheses were designed to favor the proposer's objective, for which I have found that practically all our hypotheses were made to favor the proposer's intent, which must be due to the proposer's own selfishness at the expense of truthfulness of science. With all those irrationalities of our modern sciences, yet we have opted to continually promote them. For example, if you are not a follower, you are doomed to be an outsider, for which physically realizability of sciences have been totally ignored. If not in decades, it must be over a century, of which I have found all our physical hypotheses were created in favor of the postulator's intent. This must be the game of our current fundamental physicists, to serve their own interest at the expense of a physically realizable physics, which ranges from Einstein's relativity to quantum physics of Schrödinger to QED of Feynman, and so on. They are a bunch of false hypotheses that have damaged our science. If it is not in decades, it must be over a century. To turn around, it is very much depending on the attitude of all our fundamental physicists who are willing to accept the changes for a physically realizable physics that I have discovered. Thank you.